Hello everyone. My name is Andrew Coster from Lehman College. This is my final video presentation for ESC 705. My project is entitled Where Have All the Tradesmen Gone? The Rise and Fall of Vocational Education in America. And when I went to high school, there was a technical high school in the same town that I grew up in, and it looked something like this. So the students were the same age as me, and they were from about the same socioeconomic background. However, the stereotype was that most of the students that went to that school were stupider than us, or they were less academically prepared because they didn't go to college. Instead, they were preparing to go directly into the workforce. So they were definitely looked down upon, and I wanted to include this picture of a modern-day shop class environment for you to keep in the back of your mind as we talk about vocational education in America, because it's a complex story and there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. And as I was researching this project, I was forced to reconcile some of my previous assumptions with the actual reality of the situation. Okay, let's see here. This is a picture of what a vocational classroom may have looked like in the early 1900s. And we're going to basically start here about 100 years ago and work our way towards the present day to figure out what happened to vocational programs in this country and to a certain extent in the world. So my thesis. In America, policy changes as a result of the standards-based educational reform movement have resulted in the elimination of vocational programs. Furthermore, college readiness has replaced career readiness as a determining metric in many schools and districts. And this has been going on for a while. So my main argument is that it's been going on for about 60 years, and I'll get into more detail about that in a few slides. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. If we look back to what a high school looked like at the end of the 19th century, they were primarily focused on college prep. Students from mostly wealthy families were represented in these classes. And as you can see from the picture, they looked very well-to-do, and there were boys and girls in high school at the end of the 1800s. The biggest emphasis in terms of academics was on Greek and Latin and European history. And there was very little focus on science and math and technology. Simply because there wasn't real application for those studies. The point of high school for these students was to prepare them to study the classics at the college level. Of course, all of this changed during the Industrial Revolution. So as you can see from the picture on the right, having a good grasp on the classics isn't exactly going to help you in this industrial factory environment. So these employers started to look for workers, and of course, the big question is, what skills do these workers need to succeed in these environments? So you started to see an expansion of public schools to serve poor people. So now you could go to school even if you weren't rich. And of course, the economics determined what you were going to be learning. So things like basic math skills were very important. We wanted also to teach basic reading and writing skills so that the workers could read directions and also communicate with their peers and with their bosses. So these basic skills came in conjunction with vocational skills, right? So being able to work with metal, being able to work with wood, plumbing, electricity, all of these essential vocational skills came in handy in these environments. And basically what this was, or at least what I found out, was that this was a mimicry of the German system. So Americans during this time period imported or adopted a lot of their teaching and educational mentality from the European industrial educational system, which was pioneered by the Germans at the end of the 19th century. So that will come into play, especially as the country went to war. So during World War I, we obviously had an increased need for factory workers, and with the war also came an anti-German sentiment, which meant that the industrial style of a public school which taught vocational skills was sort of rejected. And what this did was this actually laid the groundwork for a big split between teaching vocational skills and teaching general academic or college readiness skills. This split was embodied in the Smith-Hughes Act of 1917, which actually separated vocational education and general education at the national level. And in many districts, it actually sought to establish a separate board of education for both general education and for vocational education. So students entering into the public school system were kind of split, or at least they were forced to choose which direction they wanted to take from the very start of their high school experience. Okay, during the Great Depression, there was obviously high levels of unemployment in America. And so in order to counteract this, a lot of federal programs were established, like the CCC and the Work Progress Administration, a lot of the things that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. So vocational education became really important for these people as well, because we needed to train workers to build highways and to build train tracks and to build bridges, and so vocational education was very important. And this sort of just transitioned into World War II with the buildup of industry in America during the 1940s in preparation for the war. There was a lot of emphasis on vocational education just in terms of contributing to the national defense. And this also led into some post-secondary opportunities. So a lot of like 2-year technical schools were established, and these eventually became what we know today as community colleges. So that was something that was pretty interesting that I learned. Okay, so 1950s onwards. So at the end of World War II, there were just a lot of technical programs in America. And then something weird happened. It seemed like there was a decline, and it was kind of a mysterious decline. So, for example, today, right now, there's over 1,800 schools in the New York City system. But of those 1,800 schools, only 45 are classified as career technical schools, which is very interesting. And I know this from anecdotal evidence from people that I've worked with in my own experience as a teacher. We have seen these programs close. We've seen CTE, or career technical schools, close in Connecticut and also in New York City. And so it's just kind of a massive trend. There seems to be less programs offered in schools, and those schools that focus exclusively on vocational education are tending to close. This decline in enrollment isn't just in America, it's also in other countries. I'm going to show you a chart in a second that will verify that. And there's a lot of reasons why this is happening. So some scholars would point to outsourcing of these like basic industrial jobs as one of the reasons. We don't have any need to train these workers, so why would we continue to offer programs to train them? This is probably the weakest of the three arguments. I don't really find too much stake in it. It seems like actually a lot of recent surveys have shown that students graduating from school in America are struggling to find jobs regardless of their college qualifications. And in fact, a lot of positions in manufacturing are undersourced, so we don't have enough workers to provide, and so we're forced to outsource them because there's not enough workforce at home. Another possible reason why we're seeing a decline is because of the reimagining of vocational programs. This just means that the definition has been expanded somewhat since the 1950s to include like occupational vocational education, which would be like, metalworking and woodworking, but also non-occupational, which is things such as home ec or cooking classes, which I think most of us were forced to take at least one in high school. However, they are not technically career programs because they are not aligned with an existing employer. There's no sort of work study or apprenticeship aspect to that program. And then the third reason is the increase in college enrollment, and this is what I'm going to focus on for the next couple slides. Before we go any further, though, so here's just some basic info. You can see that in most regions of the world, with a few exceptions, the proportion of the students in full-time secondary programs in vocational programs has decreased from the 1950s to 1975. And if we look at this chart, this is actually enrollment in CTE programs in America since 1990 to just a couple years ago, and you can see that CTE has sharply declined while enrollment in other courses has increased. Okay, so let's focus on some of the reasons here. Looking at sort of college enrollment as the main villain in this story, it doesn't seem like more students enrolling in college would be a bad thing. However, as you look at the data and as you look at some of the scholarly research that's been published in the last 60 years, you definitely see indicators of this germ movement, this global educational reform movement that we learned about in class. And the underlying mentality for this movement is that all students should go to college. Of course, we know that the story isn't that simple, and that's kind of a naive way to view students. So basically, a lot of those vocational programs that existed before have now shifted to include like science and math and technology. There was a lot of federal legislation, which I list here, a lot of federal legislation in the last 60 years, which has changed the focus of these technical programs to include programs that don't necessarily train students to go into careers, but train them to excel in STEM programs in college. And then I also read this article by a scientist or a sociologist who was working in England, and he was analyzing programs in England as well as in America. And his argument, which I found to be pretty compelling, was that the differentiation and marginalization of students in these programs is actually a reflection of how society views them. So we are increasingly putting students into vocational programs who we do not believe would excel in college programs. However, there's such a stigma about going into these programs that there's a lot of pressure from like the parent side and from the community side to force kids into general academic education programs or like comprehensive high schools because they don't want their children or their students to be viewed as somehow less than. So we're pushing more kids into college while at the same time expanding the requirements, and it just ends up coming up short at the end of the day. There's a lot of students that are pushed into a situation that they're not necessarily prepared for or that they're just not ready for. At the same time, however, as this chart shows, we are actually increasing funding for some career and technical education programs, especially in New York City. Sorry about that. Okay, so you can see that the funding has increased over the last couple of years, and actually, even though the data ends there at 2007, there is some more up-to-date data that I'm going to link you to at the end of the presentation to show that this increase has continued. And actually, Mayor Bloomberg, a couple years ago, I think it was in 2009, he gave a speech, I think in defense of his education budget, outlining his plan to improve upon and to expand upon vocational training in New York City. So that's something to look out for too. I think a lot of people are realizing that the marginalization of vocational programs in America is leaving a lot of students in a lurch, so to speak. So just to sort of summarize the point of my research and the point of this project. Vocational education may represent an important opportunity for students who do not find success in traditional academic programs, but more importantly, the programs can result in increased engagement, retention, and graduation in urban environments. This is shown in New York City. I'm going to link you to the data in a second. And but overall, I think I really had trouble finding clear data in America. I was actually able to find a lot more data in Europe about the number of schools and the number of programs available. And moving forward in the next 10 to 20 years, I think we need to track this data a little bit better. We also need to pay attention to this situation because I think there's a lot of political and social and economic agents in this equation. I think that there's a lot of people out there who have vested interests in the way that students are trained and prepared and what sort of careers they go into. So I have a quick list. I'm going to put this in the description of my video as well. Some of the references that I used that informed my research. And then I'm going to exit out of the presentation, and I just wanted to show you, if you go to ibo.nyc.ny.us, you can actually find a survey of some very interesting reports from the New York City Independent Budget Office. This one in particular informed my research. Our city vocational education high school is being left behind, with some pretty interesting data there. I also found a list of CTE high schools in New York City. There's not very many, so that's all of them in the whole city. There's not very many at all. And then finally, I utilized the National Center for Education Statistics heavily during my research. If you click on Career Technical Education Statistics, you'll find a whole slew of useful data. So hopefully you found my presentation useful. I know we're not in the classroom right now, so I can't answer your questions face to face, but if you'd like, please post any comments or questions you have to